All right, let's talk Detroit Lions now that the first major wave of the offseason, the first major wave of free agency has come and gone. We have a chance to look at some of the Lions' moves, and actually, they made a couple really solid deals very recently that slid under the radar, but it's part of a really good strategy here by Holmes. It'll help the Lions take that next step in 2025. We'll break that down in just a second, but first, I'm Nick, that's Andrew, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. All right, the Lions have been making a lot of decent moves throughout this entire offseason, and recently they made a few other ones. And when you break down the decisions the Lions are making, it's clear they're addressing a major weakness that reared its ugly head in 2024. They fixed that problem. So, first and foremost, let's jump into a high level overview, focusing on the defensive backfield, the major moves the Lions have made there. Let's start there by just pulling this up. This is courtesy of Perplexity AI, my favorite AI to use. They don't sponsor us or anything, I just like using it. This is what they said, talking about what the moves the Lions have made at the defensive backfield so far this offseason. Of course, we all know they signed DJ Reed to that 3 year, $48 million deal. They recently signed Rock Ya-Sin. They re signed Khalil Dorsey and recently signed Avonte Maddox, formerly of the Philadelphia Eagles. Of course, they've been making a lot of postseason runs. Now, what are the Lions doing here? What they're doing here is they're adding veteran defensive depth in their backfield, their defensive backfield at the cornerback position. Lions fans, you know better than anybody, injuries on defense essentially ruined your season. And by the Washington Commanders playoff game, that disappointing defeat in the divisional round, you guys just ran out of corner. So let's pull up our first graphic here to kind of highlight what the Lions are doing. So this is when you look at the 2024 numbers on the left and 2025 on the right, the two bars there, these are the career starts and the backups in the Detroit Lions cornerback room. So in 2024, it was about 43 career starts for the Detroit Lions in terms of backup corners. That's not terrible, but when you compare it to the moves they made this offseason, right now they're all the way up in the high 80s in terms of their backups, not their starters, their backups and career starts. Talking about guys, of course, like Maddox and Rock Ya-Sin leading the charge there, two very experienced players. What are the Lions doing here? What they're doing is they're setting up for when injuries happen, because they do, no matter as much as you want to avoid them, they're going to hit you. You want to have veteran guys prepared to step up. And one way to really help that is to make sure you bring guys who've actually started a lot of football games before, because it's really tough in those big moments. If you got no experience to call on, to throw a young guy in there and hope they can succeed. It didn't work out for the Lions in the postseason this past year. Making these moves should help solve that problem. But it's not just regular season experience that the Lions have added. Again, in terms of the backups, the key depth, it's the postseason experience. Let's go ahead and go to the next chart here. This is the cornerback backups, again, with career postseason appearances in 2024, significantly less. 2025, 15 career postseason experience appearances. Again, this is the backups, not the starters, the backups. The Lions are adding experience depth at the cornerback position. This is one of the more under the radar moves I think any team has made this offseason, certainly among the top contenders in the National Football League. Sometimes when it comes to those playoff pushes, it's about having veterans you can rely on when and if injuries happen. And guess what, Lions fans, like I said already, you know it's going to hit you eventually, because it hits everybody eventually. You got to have veterans ready, willing, able, and experienced to step up. And the Lions recently added a number of them. It's been a part of a strategy this entire offseason, making sure they added a lot of experience depth at the cornerback room, whether it's regular season experience or postseason experience. They checked the box there with both of these. Phenomenal job by Holmes and the entire Lions front office. Miles, I'm curious what your thoughts are on all of this. But first, Detroit fans, in the comment section below, of all the moves the Lions have made so far this offseason, they made a decent chunk of them up to this point. Which move you think was really smart that kind of slid under the radar? What's the decision? Whether it's a re-signing, maybe they cut a player that you didn't like, or one of these guys they brought in from another team. What's the move that you think slid under the radar, but you think is going to be really valuable for the Detroit Lions going forward? Give us that in the comment section below. I want to hear from you guys. But Mize, over to you now. What are your thoughts on everything Detroit, especially what this data is telling us?
Yeah, Nick, I think this is a really interesting move because we haven't really seen a team that has been able to do what Detroit is doing right now, who's been able to kind of focus on depth with their free agency signings, because there hasn't been a team like Detroit. Detroit is really good, through and through already. Now they have the cap space and the ability to go and say, hey, well, our starting guys, we're pretty set there. We've got some young guys at corner, especially got young guys in the backfield that are good. What can we do now? We can go out and focus on some depth, especially with the injuries that they have, gone through last season. I think this was really big part of the strategy, saying we have a good team. We have a team that can get us there. Everybody knows when playoffs come around, it's all about just focusing and making sure what team is the healthiest, really. If you can stay healthy and you have a good squad, you have a pretty good chance to make it all the way, especially in the NFC, where I'd say the teams, they're very top heavy, a lot of them. You look at what happened to the 49ers, the team kind of, has been good for so long, but then all of a sudden injuries or people holding out, people not wanting to play, the team kind of falls apart with one or two key players going by the wayside. See the Detroit Lions. Detroit, Aiden Hutchinson, their best player far and away, he gets hurt, but they're still able to make it through. They make it to the end. And if they just had a little bit more depth, and I don't even think the edge really hurt them too much. It's more like you said, the corners were the biggest issue for the Detroit Lions here. I think this is a big move, and I think this is something that Brad Holmes and co. What they're doing here, it's kind of next level to me in a way that how many people go out and focus on depth and backup and just really get that deep good mid level backups where you're not too worried about if those guys have to come in and play during the season. This is really a great strategy because got Terry and Arnold, DJ Reed probably going to step up be a starter, but the other guys they've brought in really solid depth signings. I think Detroit is now primed and ready to go with this new strategy as assaulting this cornerback position, really getting it whipped into shape. I don't think that injuries are going to be a big concern for them anymore going forward.
Yeah, and if you didn't believe it by what you were seeing on the field, the data backs up that the injuries decimated this defense, especially their ability to cover. If you look at their five worst performances in terms of coverage grade and quarter in PFF, here are the weeks they occurred: 12, 15, 13, 17, and then, of course, a divisional round. And they have two more appearances in the top 10, 16 and 14. Again, late weeks, late season appearances where they're just so decimated by injuries, and the cornerback room was hit just as hard as anything else was. Obviously, defensive line was brutal when it was all said and done. But when it comes right down to it, no one really cares, right? That's the reality of the National Football League. Did you win or did you not? And that's exactly what Holmes and Dan Campbell are trying to correct this offseason. They're trying to add depth so that way when the injuries happen, because they're going to happen, are you prepared? Do you have veterans that can step up? And that's sort of one of the unheralded greatnesses of the New England Patriots dynasty. The Chiefs are like this. Frankly, the Philadelphia Eagles were like this last season. They were not injured nearly as much as the Detroit Lions, but they had their fair share of bumps and bruises, especially down the stretch. Jalen Hurts was far from 100%. He missed time during the regular season, came back in the postseason. He was far from 100%. They had injuries on the defensive line. They were able to rely on a lot of rookies, right? They found a way to battle through it because they had depth and they had veteran depth across the board that could step up when the moment and opportunities were there. I think the Detroit Lions are taking a really good approach. Again, going out and getting veterans. Rocky Ya-Sin, for example, an underrated player. Is he a superstar? Absolutely not. But you can throw him out there and he can just be decent, stabilizing. It doesn't become a disaster. You don't give up a huge amount of passing yards and a huge amount of points to Washington, for example, at home. You're a little bit more stable. And that's what the Lions have really been aggressive about going at this offseason, getting some of these guys like Maddox, I think, taken from that Philadelphia Eagles culture, bringing him into the fold, a guy with a lot of postseason experience who can step up in those moments. Again, your starters, there's a reason you brought in Reed. Terry and Arnold's a future star. But the reality is you're going to have guys out. One or both of those guys are going to miss big moments, either during the regular season or late in the season or the postseason. You need to prepare with veteran guys that can and will step up. It is so darn true. We see it every single season. Either you lose postseason games due to injuries, or you have an injury bug in the middle of the season and you go from being a 1 or 2 seed and you have home field advantage to suddenly a wild card team and your road gets a lot harder. Ask the Los Angeles Rams this past season, right? They finished the season on a really high note after being decimated with injuries earlier in the season. What happens come postseason time? They have to go on the road. They go to Philly. They lose, and they gave Philly a heck of a game. They gave them a real run for their money. The reality is the Rams had to go the hard route because they were so decimated by injuries early. They did not have the veterans ready and willing to step up in the early part of the season. They paid for it at the end. The Lions paid for it at the end this past season. And again, Brad Holmes, front office here, doing a great job recognizing this is a clear choke point to winning a championship. They've got the talent. They're stacked everywhere. Quarterback, Jared Goff, is he Mahomes, Bro, Jackson? No, but he's certainly good enough to get you there. Their offensive roster is just redonkulous across the board. Their defense is stacked in terms of their starters, right? Even their sort of positions where they're not superstars. I look at linebacker, they're still really darn good in terms of just being quality football players, gritty, smart, savvy football players. Special teams is solid. Like across the board, this is a championship roster, maybe the best roster in all of the National Football League. If they're not number one, they're probably number two, to be honest with you. The only thing that can stop the Lions is the injuries, and the Brad Holmes did a great job recognizing that weakness and solving it. Again, did it make all the headlines over the past week? No, but sometimes the championship moves are the ones that don't make all the headlines. And minus one final point here, I guess, to ask you a question, like I always love to do and put you on the spot here. With all the moves the Lions have made so far in terms of adding veteran depth in the defensive backfield, where do you think you go if you're Detroit in the draft? Do you try and maybe go more on offense for depth? Do you try and add another pass rusher? Where are you going? You need more defensive line? I personally love a team like in the Lions to just go get linemen, front four or offensive line, but that's just me. Where do you think the Lions are going in a few weeks here in April in the draft?
I think interior offensive line sounds interesting. Could be a good move. Graham Glasgow, he's getting up there. He's almost 33 years old now. I think that's a guy you got to start looking at the future of that position. He's been good, but he had a down year last year. He had a down year in 2022. So sandwiching a good year with two bad years for Glasgow, that's something you have to be considering of. You got Christian Mahogany coming in. He's a 6th-round guy. With the limited snaps he had last year, he had a really good grade, but is that 100%? Is that for real? Not 100% sure there. So I think getting an interior offensive lineman, that's, a good option for me for the Detroit Lions to get maybe the opposite side of the ball. Like you said, defensive line, another pass rusher opposite. Aiden Hutchinson could be good as well. Marcus Davenport seems interesting, but I think maybe focusing on that side of the ball, if there's a young guy that looks really talented that drops to you, they're going to be picking late. So interior offensive line, to me, I think that sounds like where the money is. You can get some really quality guys at that point in the draft. Edge rushers, the premium guys that usually go a little bit earlier than where Detroit's going to be picking. It's a victim of your own success at this point, which isn't a bad place to be at. But if there's a guy that falls to you and you love him as far as an edge guy, I say go there. But my number one, I think the best option for them, get an interior offensive line guy. Start thinking towards the future so you don't have too much turnover on this fantastic offensive line.